Who will be the MVP? Who will be the rookie of the year? We discuss that and a generational argument between eras in the NBA. It's all right now on the Locked On NBA podcast.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On NBA podcast. So glad to have you back here on a Wednesday. We're 5 days a week throughout the entire season. Doesn't matter that it's the end of August. Doesn't matter that September is around the corner. But hey, basketball is right around the corner. We're here for you every day. And on Wednesdays, we're your regular crew. I'm John Karalis, host of the Locked On Celtics podcast. You find me on Twitter at John_Karalis.
And I'm Jake Madison, host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast, on Twitter at NOLAJake. This third segment's going to be feisty, dude.
I'm looking forward to that. As an old myself, is the grays in my beard will attest. The attacks by Anthony Edwards on the era that I grew up on will not go by quietly. And Magic Johnson and Kevin Garnett have made sure of that as well. So I'm looking forward to that. But our first two segments are going to focus on ESPN's annual offseason survey. Tim Bontemps talks to like 18 people in various roles, and they split it up into two pieces. We've already talked about the first bit for it was a few weeks ago. Now we're splitting this into two segments. In the second one, we'll talk about their team answers, but we're going to start off with player-specific predictions. The first two answers here don't really need much. Jake, who's the best NBA player right now? 15 votes. Nikola Jokic, 2 for Luka Doncic, 1 for Anthony Edwards. I'm totally fine with that. Are you?
Yeah, you could throw Giannis a vote in there, but like overall, like it feels like Jokic is the best player in the league, and everyone seems to agree. Like I think we're all in consensus here.
People are really high on Anthony Edwards. Luka just got his team to the finals, I think. But, Jokic is a special player. I can see that. And it's only 18 people. If you get to 25 people, there might be a few Giannis votes in there. So that has to be taken into consideration. But the best player in 5 years, again, not really a surprise. Victor Wembanyama with 12 votes.
Running away with it, by the way.
Yeah.
It seemed like, right? Like,
yeah.
Which again is no surprise. That dude is a generational talent. You saw it on full display. Just the athleticism, all of the skills he has are just absurd.
Yeah, it makes total sense. He's absolute, just a one-of-a-kind player. Even in the world of fives who step out and play on the perimeter, he is unique. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander gets 2 votes, Luka 2, Anthony Edwards 1, Nikola Jokic 1. Shout out to that one person who thinks Jokic still has it in 5 years. He's still going to be great, but who knows what 5 years? If he's even around in 5 years, he might be like, okay, I've done enough. I'm hanging out with my horses.
Play with my ponies and my horses here.
That's it. Okay, but here's where it gets a little bit interesting because I like this. This upcoming season's MVP split, basically Shai Gilgeous-Alexander with 7. Lots of OKC love and SGA love in this survey. Luka with 5, Anthony Edwards with 2, Jokic with 2, Jayson Tatum makes his first appearance with 2 votes. Interesting that SGA gets 7. I thought Luka might get a few more votes because of the finals run, and people might, if he gets to that, if he gets the Mavs to a higher kind of top 4, top 3 seed, then he has a real good chance of being the engine that gets them there. Maybe having Kyrie on the team takes away, because like, hey, you've got Kyrie, and there are a lot of good players in the OKC Thunder, but SGA is clearly like the guy there. So maybe that's why he gets number 1. Would you have gone any different way?
No, like I probably would have picked between one of these two. I think it's kind of splitting hairs if you want like one over the other. That's why I think it's so close in the voting here. And it makes sense, right? Luka just took that team to the NBA finals, carried them a little bit, right? It feels like even with Kyrie there. and they're going to be in the running for it yet again. He's like a triple-double machine, does some things we've just really never seen before. Truly a special player. Like, he's kind of been in the running for the MVP conversation the past couple of years. And then SGA, look, they were the number one seed in the Western Conference, a brutally tough Western Conference last year. He finished second in MVP voting. If you think this team is going to do well, and we'll talk more about this in the next segment here when we kind of look at the team side of this survey, yeah, it makes sense to put him up there. And you made the really good point of, Luka has Kyrie. He now has Klay Thompson. Maybe that kind of takes away from his stats a little bit. But you look at Oklahoma City, and like the unquestioned leader, like by far, is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And I think that's the type of thing that maybe elevates him over Luka a little bit.
Yeah, it's about who's doing the more carrying, which
right.
is,
Yeah.
And already we're getting some Jokic fatigue because it very easily could be Jokic again, right? Like he's that good. Jayson Tatum, only 2 votes. Lots of discussion this summer about Jayson Tatum. Now, obviously, he's a guy I cover very closely. I understand that he's not a singular kind of like heliocentric player, that the Celtics depend on in the same way that Dallas depends on Luka and Denver depends on Jokic. And maybe because Jaylen Brown is so good and Derek Whitehead's gotten so good and Porzingis, when he comes back, is very important. And like there's a lot of production spread around. Is there anywhere, like, I want to get the outside perspective here. Is there any way you think Tatum can make a legit MVP run considering the other candidates here?
Yeah, I mean, look, if they run away with the Eastern Conference again, and you kind of look at that team, and you listed the reasons why he's going to kind of lose votes in this sort of thing. There's just so much talent there, and the production spread around. But if he has maybe his best year as a pro and leads him to a number 1 seed, after winning the title again, like that's going to take you far, right? I think he's also more of a two-way guy than some of the other names that we more so than Luka. Shai's good on both sides, but so is Tatum. So that needs to factor into that a little bit. But I think having a guy like, Jaylen Brown and some of the others on that team is going to hurt him a little bit. And I think that's what boosts Shai Gilgeous-Alexander up. But like, I think there's an argument to be made. Like, he's the type of guy that's going to get a lot of like, token 3rd, 4th, 5th place votes in the MVP voting. Even if he doesn't have like an outstanding year, you're going to be like, well, he's the best player on the best team, so we've got to vote for him like 3rd in the MVP, which probably means he finishes like 4th somewhere in there, I think. And that's probably where he's going to end up. But of these guys, he's going to have the best chance at winning a title. So I think he'll take that sacrifice.
Yeah. Surprised that there's no Embiid on this list. I mean, Embiid was having a MVP level season. You think everybody just acknowledges the injuries aren't going to allow him to be part of the conversation?
So do you think him winning it 2 years ago hurts it too? When I think we look back on that one, and I think in the moment that made sense, and then we kind of look back on it and you're like, oh, that probably should have gone to Jokic, shouldn't it have?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wonder if it's like, okay, we gave it to him. Now maybe we wish we didn't. And it's not like he wasn't a worthy candidate that year either. But I wonder if that kind of factors into it as well, of like, yeah, we can't give it to him again. He got his one. That's kind of really all he deserves. And then no, but you get what I'm saying. Like, and then there's definitely the inherent, like, he's not going to play enough games.
Yeah, I think they're not going to play enough games, and maybe with Paul George there and Maxey, it's just going to be too much split between the 3, so it's going to be tough for, I don't think it's going to be all Embiid all the time there. Quickly, the rookie stuff. This is we know that this draft was not exactly loaded with talent. This is not a class where people are expecting, like Victor Wembanyama is obviously the class of the last class. So the questions here: who will be the rookie of the year? And then who will be the best player from this class in 5 years? Extraordinarily interesting to me, because Zach Edey gets 8 votes to be rookie of the year, but 0 votes to be the best player in the class like 5 years from now. It's like almost like was it like an Evan Turner situation like going on with this? I'm kind of like shocked that nobody said, well, 5 years from now, it's going to be like Edie's going to be anywhere in that mix.
I think when you look at like this survey, right, of the names they listed, Edie, Shepard, Sarr, Castle da Silva, and Dillingham, like Edie's going to have the biggest role this year. Like in theory, he's starting on that Memphis Grizzlies team. That's going to lead to a lot of production over some of these other players, I think. So when you're going to look at production on this, I think you're almost, say Edie just plays the majority of the games there, puts up some numbers, like you got to kind of give it to him. But I think when you're looking at like ceiling for guys, like to me, he still projects almost as like a backup big man, but given the center situation is not great in Memphis, like you almost need to start him, I think is what it looks like. But you look at someone like Reed Shepard, who they think is going to be the best player. To me, that's an elite shooter, a guy that's going to have a clear role in the NBA, be a starter. He might not be the number one guy on a team, but is he 2? Is he 3 in a high level capacity? I think so. And I think that's kind of where people are projecting him as well, but he's going to be on a middling Houston Rockets team, that has a lot of young talent too. Will he find the right role for him? Will he have the production? Probably not.
That's literally, it's like you're reading my notes that he's on a perimeter heavy team with a lot of like when there's, I don't know if instability is the right word, but they're still figuring things out. And it might take him a little while to kind of find his footing. And maybe it is in Houston, maybe it's not. But yeah, I can see why that would be the case. I'm curious how Edie's going to look in Memphis. So it's such a different Memphis team that we saw this past season, to have Morant back and Desmond Bain and, Jaren Jackson, Marcus Smart, like that. There's a lot of people there that are going to want touches.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And they need a center, and Edie's huge, and he moves like an NBA big. Like he's more mobile than people realize, I think. So he's going to be tough to guard. But I think, say, when that Memphis team is like truly a title contender, if they get to that status, he's going to be their like 5th starter at most with some of the talent that they have. So that I think like hurts him in the long run. But this year they really do need him. And I think it's going to take teams a minute to be like, what do we do to defend this? Just he's 7'2", right? He's a massive guy.
Let's get into the team portion of this. Who is going to be the class of the East, the West, and who's going to win the NBA title? 2 very clear favorites from this survey coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, a very favorite place for my co-host Jake Madison to shop, because he knows that passion, drive, and patience is the formula for winning championship, and also what keeps your ride or die alive, and his ride or die is pretty sweet. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle like Jake and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you're always going to find what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Hey, make your second listen one of the many podcasts that we have here. Each team has its own Locked On podcast. So we're just talking about Locked On Grizzlies. Check them out to get more on Zach Edey. You're going to talk about, like, I think I'm going to have to do a ton of crossovers with Locked On Thunder, because Celtics and Thunder are the 2 clear favorites when we talk about the teams in these in this survey, this ESPN survey. The winners, projected winner in the East, Celtics get 13 votes, 2 votes each for the Bucks and the Knicks, 1 for the Sixers. Not a surprise that the Celtics, the reigning champs, bringing the entire team back. I know Kristaps Porzingis is out for a couple of months, but pretty clear. I think the rest.
This was like the easiest one, right? Like this was the easiest thing we're going to talk about. Celtics are the class of the East. And while other teams are good, and that's going to be a more competitive conference, I don't think any other team is on the same level as the Celtics at all.
Who's their biggest competitor?
I don't know, right? Like that's what's so interesting. And you kind of see that in the survey here, right? Like The Bucks, the Knicks, and the Sixers definitely are it. And I kind of have them all in the same tier right
Yeah.
now. I think when you look at overall ceiling, it probably is the Sixers with Embiid, Paul George, and Maxey. But health is kind of the big thing on that
Yeah.
team. With Paul George, with Embiid, don't really know. The Bucks have Giannis, who probably should have gotten some votes. There's like a fly flying around me here as I'm recording. So if you see me swinging my arms on YouTube, that's why. Driving me insane. So, the Bucks probably, are still the Bucks, but they were disappointing the past year. The Lillard trade isn't great. And then, the Knicks made all of these moves, but I think there's a little, and I'm high on the Knicks. I like that team. The vibes are high, but vibes don't win a title, right? So I still want to see them kind of do it. The Randall situation that we talked about a week ago is still maybe like kind of in play for them. If Randall comes back and just looks like, the all NBA Julius Randle, I'd maybe elevate the Knicks to like the safest contender for the 2 spot in the East.
I think the Knicks are a legitimate threat to Boston. They play a style that can challenge them, a very physical style. Not that the Celtics have been, they were less bothered by it last season than in seasons past, but they play tough basketball. They can clearly defend, but they have weak spots that the Celtics can exploit, I think. But they are certainly all three of these teams, and we'll see what the Bucks. The Bucks have the biggest question marks, and yes, they have Giannis, they have Dame, but they have question
they also
marks.
got Doc Rivers,
guys. But the guys were talking about on yesterday's show how they do have Doc Rivers, but they did get better with Doc Rivers. There is something to be said, whether Doc's the guy or not, coming into the season with some more stable coaching, at least established NBA coaching, a person who knows how to talk to players can maybe get them started off on a better foot, and they can make a little bit more noise. But clearly the Celtics are, I think, the class of the East. And according to this survey, the Thunder are the class of the West because they get 14 votes to Dallas's 2 and Minnesota's 2. Do you think OKC is that much of a runaway in the West?
So I get why people are voting this way, right? They were the number 1 seed and they kind of addressed everything they needed to address in the offseason. They brought in Hartenstein to kind of be their center to play alongside Chet Holmgren. They needed someone like that. They added Alex Caruso for very little. Adding him to an already really good defensive team makes a lot of sense. So they're a team that when you look at some of the others don't really have like huge question marks about them. But I will say this, them being that kind of a runaway favorite in this voting, to me, I think is a little bit of fool's gold here. We look at these young teams that have superstar level players and you just think progression is linear, right? You go from, losing in the first round to winning the first round and then so on and so forth till you win an NBA finals. And we saw this before with Oklahoma City. Now, it's a different coaching staff, different players. We saw them make the finals and then never get back there, even though they had, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, of course, James Harden left during all of that too, but they never were able to reach those same heights. And it shows you that, progression isn't always linear when it comes to that. And there's so many other factors into these things. So I get why people are voting this way, but I don't expect OKC to run away with the Western Conference or anything close to that.
It's so interesting. Like, again, this is like one of the points that I was going to make. You've seen teams, I think, when you have an atmosphere like they had in OKC last season, a lot of guys were willing to do a lot of things. They were willing to, and I think maybe I could put it a better way. A lot of guys were willing to give up a chance to do something. They were very good at the good to great shot, right? You pass up a good shot, you get a great shot. They had a bunch of guys that shot better than you expect from 3, and it was something that killed them in the playoffs. Now, they did bring in a really good shooter in Caruso, and we'll see how that pans out. Like, what is there a water reaching its level thing or whatever? But the point I'm trying to make here is that atmosphere is part of what doesn't always carry over. And we've seen teams, I remember Sacramento a few years ago, Brooklyn a few years ago, where they outperform the expectation by a lot. And OKC was expected to be good, but not top seed good. And they made a run that everybody was just kind of waiting for, like, all right, when do they kind of drop back down to the rest of the when do they kind of course correct? And they never really did until the playoffs. That
Yeah.
kind of team has a tendency to that's the type of team that has a tendency to regress, is what I'm saying. I don't know how far they're going to regress, if they're going to regress. I feel like I've seen this before, and there's going to be some level of guys who are going to be like, hey, I'm going for mine now. You got guys going into their third years of contracts that are making big impacts. And there's just, there's too many guys that still have money on the line, that have other motivations, that are all about winning, but too many players at this age want to win a certain way. And after sacrifices for 1 year, they're like, okay, now it's my time to step into a bigger role. But there's a lot of guys trying to step into a bigger role. I have a feeling that it's going to be a little bumpier in OKC this year.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair thing to say. And again, you look at the teams they're kind of competing with, right? Like there's 3 teams in the West that I think you kind of put in their own tier ahead of everyone else. And it's OKC, it's the Dallas Mavericks, and then it's the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves' big addition this offseason was trading up for Rob Dillingham. Like that doesn't strike me as the move that kind of puts you over the edge. The Dallas Mavericks got Klay Thompson, but what does he have left? And I like some of the other moves that they've made, but is that the thing that gets you a title? And I'm not exactly sure that it is. So OKC feels like the safest choice out of all of those. But again, I don't think it always just works in that fashion where you actually just build upon what you did previously. Otherwise, you'd see a lot of teams that we'd say are true finals contenders, but don't actually become that.
So Celtics and Thunder are the 2 favorites, and they've really basically split the who will win the final, the title. Celtics 8, Thunder 7. I mean, there are a lot of people who are just all in here on the Thunder. I still, hey, look, the background that I
might be a
normally
little
use
biased here.
is like my normal background is this with the championship here on the so I'm clearly going to say that the Celtics are going to repeat. But they are best positioned to repeat. I still think the Thunder are too young to make that. I don't
think this should be this close. Like, I don't think this should be this close. Like, why aren't people picking the Celtics? Like, answer me that, right? Like, before you're allowed to vote for another team, you need to give me a very valid reason beyond just it's hard to repeat of why the Celtics wouldn't win the title this coming year. They lost nothing. Like there's no reason to doubt the team that just dominated the NBA for a year.
I guess just to make the quick argument as we, get ready to wrap this up, Porzingis being out for a couple months could hurt them. But this is a team where there's no contractual stuff. All the money's been made and handed out. There's no individual motivation for anybody outside. Like everybody's accomplished kind of everything. So, and on top of it, you've got the 2 best players who kind of feel like they've been disrespected over the summer, Jaylen Brown, because he was left off of Team USA, and Jayson Tatum, because he was benched twice by Team USA. So I think there's a little bit of an added motivation for them to be like, oh, okay. After we won the championship, we're getting this. Like, okay, well, all right, we'll just have to do it again. So I feel like there's a little motivation there as well. All right, let us know in the comments what do you think about all the stuff that we've touched on here with the survey. Now, old people and young people are going to yell at each other when Anthony Edwards and Magic Johnson and Kevin Garnett all talking about different eras. We'll talk about that in just a second. Oh, Jake Madison.
Oh, boy.
That brash, young, trash-talking Anthony Edwards, who we love him for who he is, right? He is not afraid to say what's on his mind. And sometimes it's fun. And sometimes it's like, oh, okay, well, you're still a kid. Don't know what you're talking about. But he started a little bit of a firestorm last week where he said to the Wall Street Journal, talking about eras, he says, I didn't watch it back in the day, so I can't speak on it. But then he continues to speak on it. They say it was tougher back then than it is now, but I don't think anybody had skill back then. Michael Jordan was the only one that really had skill. You know what I mean? Okay. Well, Magic Johnson responded and said, oh, I don't respond to guys who haven't won a championship. And I don't know if he's ever won a championship, even going back to high school. So there's a dig. And then Kevin Garnett said, I don't think anybody in this generation could have played 20 years ago. And he's talking about how physical it was. And he wrapped it up by saying, this is on his podcast, you can't come for our era and not expect a rebuttal. It was totally different. So I don't know, man. Like, I feel like when we get into these generational debates, everybody wants to defend their favorite generation, right? If you're 20 years old and watching this, you're going to probably agree with Anthony Edwards. I'm 51. I grew up watching 80s basketball. Let me tell you something. Those guys were pretty damn skilled. And I didn't like the 90s era basketball. I wasn't a real fan of it going over the top physicality, even though I love physical basketball. But those guys had skill. And these guys right now have skill. Maybe they are the most skilled. But every NBA era had players who were incredibly skilled. And
yes, right. Like that doesn't. It's so annoying that we have to say that. Like, I don't know. Has Anthony Edwards ever watched like Hakeem play? Because that dude for a big man was incredibly skilled in a way that like no one had been. Right, like. Unbelievable. The dream shake is a thing for a reason that most players probably couldn't pull off right now, as talented as they are, right? Like everyone has look, if you make it in the NBA and if you're an all-star level player, like you have skill. It's really as simple as that. It's just a different era and it was played differently. And if these current players traveled back in time, they might struggle with the physicality to begin with. The hand checking, the different defensive rules are very much a thing. And then they would adjust and they would be fine. And then if you took those players from that era and you put them in here, guys like Hakeem with the spacing that he would get right now would absolutely feast with some of these, on some of these teams here, right? Can you imagine like a prime Shaq on like a Golden State Warriors team with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson? Like, what do you do? Like, what do you do there, right? Like, all of these guys probably would have succeeded in any year, in any era for the most part, because they're top athletes and that's what they do.
That's right.
That's how guys can go from playing in FIBA and in Europe to succeeding in the NBA. It's a very different style of play where you need to relearn a lot of things. You even saw some talk about that on Twitter today with Campazzo and Jokic when they were on the Nuggets discussing that. I don't have know who to credit on getting that quote, but he's like, I had to relearn the game. And then they did, and it was fine, and they're still successful, and it proves that people can do that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's the time machine aspect of it that that's not how I look at these debates at all, because time machines don't exist. If Bill Russell existed in this era, that means he would have been born in 2004, 2005, 2006. And a player born in 2004, 5, or 6 is going through the AAU system and has advanced. If he's targeted as an elite player, he will have access to prep schools and advanced nutrition and advanced training. And he wouldn't be a stick who wore Converse. He would be probably 30 pounds heavier because he'd be lifting weights. And you know what? If you took Shaquille O'Neal and transported him back to the 60s, he wouldn't be as big as he was because they didn't lift weights as well. Now, he'd be big because he's a big dude, but he'd be skinnier. So these guys in the different eras always adjust to the era that they're in. So I think
it's like that simple.
Anthony Edwards Kevin Garnett, they're both wrong. They're both wrong.
I want to throw one more name out here because this is just fun to do. Can you imagine? So this is something that I love because it's a Louisiana thing. And it's Pistol Pete, former Celtic for a year, right? Like I think at one point he might still have the scoring average in college in terms of points per game. And he did it without a 3-point line. And most of his shots came from actually behind a 3-point line, where if you were to actually figure out his college per game numbers with a 3-point line, it'd be like 10 to 15 points more than what it is. He'd be fine in today's NBA, right?
Yeah.
Like
Jerry West is another one. Jerry West
a great example.
is a great example of a guy shot from very far away that could probably bury a ton of threes.
It would be okay.
It'd be okay. It'd be okay. You know what I mean? So Anthony Edwards is wrong because players had skill, tons of skill. They were incredibly skilled players. And you know what? It bugs me. It bugs me that he's that wrong, because you're a player in this league. And okay, I'm not telling you should watch the players back then. You don't have to watch whatever you don't want to watch. But you know what? One thing that bugs me is hearing former players on TV talk like they hate the game, right? And so it bugs me where the reverse is a guy like Anthony Edwards talking like he hates the history of the game.
Yeah, it's like you've got to embrace that stuff. You've got to embrace all areas. You hear sports writers do this too, where they're like, oh, if you like the game now, you would have loved it 20 years ago. It's like, how about you just love it all the time?
Yes, exactly. I grew up on 80s basketball. It was a completely different style, no emphasis on the 3-pointers. And a lot of people from my generation look at the game now and are like, oh my God, so many threes. What are they doing? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, hey man, that's what it is. They figured out the math. They've broken the game to a point where, like, when I say broken the game, like they figured out the formula. They figured it out. And now this is what it is until the rules change. And someday the rules will change and teams will try to break the league again. That's how it always happens. They did it. Wilt Chamberlain did it, and they changed they changed the width of the lane. Everybody changes, like Shaq did it, and they changed how rims were designed. Like there's always something that changes when, like, Victor Wembanyama is going to do something that might actually lead to some rule changes because he's so special.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And players are so special that if you can't just appreciate each generation of basketball, then I feel like you're doing something wrong. This is a beautiful game, and each generation, it's just different. Maybe I like certain things better, but that doesn't mean you can't appreciate the other part of it and say, you know what, that was Anthony Edwards should look back at those guys and understand that's going to be the reason. Those guys are the reason why he's going to make probably $1 billion by the time he's done playing, right? All these young stars are going to become billionaires because
they're going to make tons of money because of the league and the popularity and the people before them.
And I can excuse.
We're going to do this in 20 years about Anthony Edwards and be like, oh, he couldn't survive now in whatever era we're going to be when we're still podcasting here on Locked On NBA.
I know, right? Me, 80-year-old me.
Yeah, John in his late 70s here being like, oh, yeah, I remember Anthony Edwards. He wouldn't be able to hack it now.
I will give KG a little bit of a pass because he does love today's game. He loves it. He's defending that generation. He kind of was in that bridge. He's going to defend it because Anthony Edwards came for like his guys, in his era. But I will give KG a lot of credit. He's not one of the guys I was talking about. He loves today's game and he speaks very highly of it. So, but it's an interesting debate, and I'd love to hear what you got to say in the comment section. Make sure you're subscribed there to the YouTube page. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your audio podcasts. If you want to listen in the car on your way to work or whatever, and make sure you're listening to us on Wednesdays because I'm your host, John Karalis, host of the Locked On Celtics podcast. Find me on Twitter at John_Karalis. I'm
glad we didn't turn this segment into real or fake because it just did not need it because everyone likes all eras here.
Yeah. You know what? We didn't do a real or fake. It didn't deserve a real or fake.
This didn't deserve it. I agree with that. Okay. I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans at NOLA Jake. By the way, Pistol Pete Maravich, 44.2 points per game average in college.
Wow. We'll play. You know what?
There we go. We got to play the music.
Is this real or fake? Just ask John and Jake.
Real or fake, Jake Madison? Whoops, it looped. Real or fake, Jake Madison? The show is over.
Real.
That's very real. And I'll add to that. Show should have been over 5 minutes ago. Hey, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Check out Nick and Pat the Designer tomorrow here on the Locked On NBA podcast. Make sure you're watching. Make sure you're listening. And thank you for doing so. Now share it. Bye, everybody.